Hey everyone, and welcome to the first video for Chapter 21, where we'll be talking about the two regions in the world during this time period, kind of this post-classical time period from about 650 up until about 1450. But we're talking about the two regions of the world that had not yet encountered the quote-unquote civilized world. When we talk about the more civilized world in this post-classical time period, we're talking about Europe, we're talking about the Middle East, we're talking about India and China and so forth. So this is before the European age of exploration begins after Columbus and really gets going in the 15 and 1600s. So the two areas that we'll be discussing in this one are the Americas, both North and but more especially Central and South America, and also Oceania, which are kind of those island regions in the Pacific, such as Polynesia, Micronesia, the state of Hawaii, and so forth. All right, so the first one that we're going to be talking about today are the states of Mesoamerica. All right, Mesoamerica, we're talking about Middle America, mostly Mexico, but also some of those other Central American countries, such as Costa Rica, Bolivia, and so forth. And the first civilization we'll be discussing, and this will be a very quick one, are the Toltecs. Now, the Toltecs came to power in about the 8th century. They lasted from about the 8th to the 12th century, mid to late 1100s. Their civilization kind of ended and died out. And they never really established a large empire, but they did have a pretty expansive influence throughout central Mexico, right? You see the core area here in green, and you see the kind of purple line showing the extent of Toltec artifacts and architectural influence. They also regularly traded with the Maya. Okay, the Maya would here on the Yucatan Peninsula, so you did have a connection between the two sides. The Maya were around, were prominent on the Yucatan Peninsula around the same time. So even though that they didn't have, kind of a strong centralized government, they did build a strong central city at the city of Tula. Right, you can see that right here on the map. And the influence of the Maya is definitely seen in the architecture of the temples. You see that with the pyramid-like structures, these large statues as well. This is still, obviously a photograph, so you can still go and see these historic sites. But Tula was a fairly bustling metropolitan area, center of trade and commerce and so forth. But around the mid to late 1100s, you start to see internal decline and also some nomadic invasions from the surrounding people. It left a power vacuum for new migrant groups to fill. And the most prominent ones who emerge from this are the Mexica. Now, Mexica is synonymous with Aztec. And we typically, in most textbooks, use the word Aztec. That's the much more better known term. But if you wanted to be very specific, Aztec refers to the empire that was created by the Mexica and a couple of other groups. The Mexica were just the group that dominated that empire in the 15th century. And obviously, this is where we get the name of the current nation of Mexico. So they really kind of formed this alliance, and settled in and around the Lake Texcoco. And they founded their capital city on a small island in here. You can see that island right here. And this city, and I always have to kind of say it a little bit slowly at first, Tenochtitlan, it was an island city, very unique structure that, you see the bridges and kind of man-made kind of roadways that led into it. You think, well, why would they choose this? Why would they, kind of build it up on these wet swamplands? Well, one, they did give them certain agricultural benefits, which I'll go over in a second, but also it gave them a certain amount of protection, right? Islands are somewhat isolated and it helps from attackers and so forth. Wouldn't save them from eventual conquest by the Spanish, but against their rivals, it certainly helped a bit. Now, when you are living on this kind of wet, swampy land, it forces you to innovate in order to build up your agriculture. And so they developed this system called the Chinampa system. What they would do is they would dredge dirt from the bottom of the lake and build it up on small plots. Okay, like so. And these plots would then be used for agriculture, particularly for things such as beans, squash, maize, right, North American or Native American term for corn, and tomatoes. Now, these plots were small, but they were very, very fertile, so they could yield several crops per year. So they made up for what they lacked in size in efficiency. But the Chinampa system is still something that is used in Central and South America to this day in kind of these wet, swampy areas. Now, as I said, the Mexica really kind of became the dominant group in this Aztec Empire. And by the early 1400s, they had created an alliance with neighboring groups. Right, you see here the core states of the Aztec Empire with Tenochtitlan right here, kind of the capital city, if you will. And then you've got allied states here, and then the other ones are referred to as tributary states. I'll go over that in a sec. So the Mexica really dominated it, which is a reason why they've kind of become synonymous with the word Aztec. Okay, technically it's not the same thing, but for our purposes, it's not really going to screw you up. Now, at its height, it was a decent-sized empire. It controlled over 12 million subjects. They did not implement direct administrative rule, but rather they ruled through a tribute system. Okay, they never developed an elaborate bureaucracy. They left the governance in the hands of the local conquered people, similar to the ruling style of the Mongols. They just made sure that you got paid, and as long as that happened, everything was good. And trade from the tribute made Tenochtitlan a very, very wealthy city. Okay, this was a bustling metropolis. It was the largest city in the Americas at its height by the 14 and 1500s. And when the Spanish would come a couple of years later, they really marveled about the size of it, about the complexity, kind of the cosmopolitan aspects of it with its merchants, its temples, its stores, and, the amount of goods that were being sold. It rivaled an awful lot of the cities that you would see in Europe as well. It's just that you really didn't see too much else like that anywhere in the Americas. All right, so that is our first video. As I said, these videos in this chapter will be relatively brief, where we talk about the states of Mesoamerica, and we'll talk about Mesoamerican society in the next one.